It's another Football Friday hangout here at the News OK studios. I'm Jenny Carlson sitting in for the vacationing Mike Sherman, and I'm joined by part of our college football coverage team. Barry Trammell may join us in progress, but Jason Kersey joins us from, well, Jason, where are you?
Hello, I am in Blackbird Burritos in Morgantown, West Virginia.
Are you having a burrito currently?
Blackbird, that's in Norman. Black Bear burritos. Blackbird is in Norman.
And have you?
I'm having a burrito, but I'm putting it aside so that I can talk with you guys.
Very good, very good. We'll expect a report as things go on. Also joining us, Kyle Fredrickson from here in Oklahoma City. Kyle, how's it going?
Pretty well. I'm jealous that I don't have a delicious burrito in front of me, but I'll have to deal with my coffee for now.
Yeah, me too. I'm thinking I'm going to have a salad for lunch, and suddenly that sounds terrible, frankly. So, Jason, let's start with you because you are out in the West Virginia area getting ready for OU's game tomorrow night against West Virginia. You've been there for more than 24 hours at this point. Give us the highlight. What's the best thing you've seen so far on your travels out east?
We didn't really. We went out last night in Pittsburgh to watch the Kansas State game. That was fun. Just kind of driving around Morgan. It's just such a different place than any other spot in the Big 12, and I think that's what's the most interesting about it. When we pulled into Morgantown, there was a sign on a building that said, "Welcome to Big 12 country." I thought that was pretty funny. Because, tech is, but really it's so different than anything else and so far away from the rest of Big 12 country. But it's a neat place. This is my second trip here, and I really like it.
Well, you mentioned watching that K-State game last night, and I think a lot of us were paying attention to Auburn at K-State. And let's start there before we get into OU, West Virginia, or OSU's off week now heading towards the Tech game. But first of all, either of you guys got any kicking ability in your background? I'm thinking K-State might be looking for a kicker. Kyle, what do you think?
I'm not sure. I'm the guy in fourth grade. I was behind a game-winning soccer shootout goal, so I can kick it, but I don't know if that translates necessarily to the football field. But yeah, you get a feel for the K-State kicker. I can't imagine that going class this week is going to be a whole lot of fun. And that was really what we saw. I mean, that was the crux of that Kansas State game. I mean, you give Auburn credit for playing good defense in the red zone and forcing those field goals. The two short ones they missed, but yeah, what a strange turn of events, and you got to feel for that guy.
Yeah, definitely. So, Jason, I know there was high school football success for you at Noble High back in the day. Any kicking? And I'll also ask you this: was that a win for the Big 12 last night?
No, I was not a kicker in high school. I was. The success of my teammates wasn't, I didn't have a whole lot of individual success in any position in high school football. But was it a win? Maybe, I guess. But I think that, when you look at Alabama, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, Florida State, and now this, the Big 12 needs to stop having moral victories. They need to have actual victories. And so this third time, where they've come so close to pulling off a big upset, I think it's becoming harder to view these as victories because it's pretty disappointing to watch because they should have won that game. I mean, there's no reason they shouldn't have won that game.
Barry Trammell joins us, by the way, and Barry, it looks like you might be mobile at this point. Where are you?
I'm on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, just west of Harrisburg.
All right. Also
beautiful
traveling.
Part of the country, and let me promise you, within 30 miles, any direction of me, are 15 guys that could kick field goals from inside 40 yards. So my favorite person on the face of the earth in terms of college football, Bill Snyder, is 100% responsible for this loss. If you don't have a kicker in college football, that's on you. That's on you. That's on the coach, because they're everywhere.
Now,
and if you don't happen to have one, you just didn't have attention to detail.
Now, you got to say to defend him, though, that this guy, he thought he did have a kicker. This guy only missed 2 all of last year.
Yeah.
Well, he kicked too many against Northern Iowa. That's all I can say, for crying out loud. That was all. It wasn't like they were asking him to kick 47-yard field goals. They were all a bunch of chip shots.
Yeah, not a good show by the K-State kicker, and three turnovers as well by the K-State offense. You can't overlook that. But Barry, I'll ask you what I asked Jason. How does this factor into the Big 12? I mean, this wasn't a win, but does it help anybody in any way when you talk about college football playoff and some of the rankings out there?
Sure, it helps the SEC. It helps the Pac-12. It helps everybody except the Big 12. If the Big 12 wants to stand on its soapbox today and say we're an excellent conference, I say that's great. I agree with you. Just show me the evidence. Give me one reason to believe you're any good. Who have you beat? The best two wins for the Big 12 in this non-conference are West Virginia and Oklahoma State, and they lost. Mm-hmm. The best wins are losses. Mm-hmm. What is the best win? Tennessee? Maryland? Yep. I don't know. I mean, it's just Iowa. I mean, you got to beat somebody. And so if the Big 12 loses out come December with the committee, you know, they lose a tiebreaker with an 11-1 team or something, Big 12's got no grounds to stand on.
Well, I think that's a great point, and you mentioned that Maryland win, and that was West Virginia last week, beating a Maryland team pretty soundly, and that sort of sets up this week's game. OU coming off the big win against Tennessee. Let's get into this for a second. Jason, let's start with the OU defense. Obviously, 2 years ago, a huge track meet essentially broke out in Morgantown. The team's going back and forth, unbelievable yardages, statistics that would otherwise be the headline were sort of forgotten about in that game. There were so many wild yardages that were picked up. So I got to ask you, considering this West Virginia team where they are now, Clint Trickett seemingly leading the offense in a way that maybe hasn't happened under Holgorsen at West Virginia, who's the OU defender most under the radar in this game? Most under the gun. Maybe I asked that wrong. Most under the gun. How about that?
Well, I think it's Zach Sanchez and Julian Wilson, the cornerbacks. I mean, Zach Sanchez has had an excellent season, but he's got a bum shoulder, it looks like, so he's going to be playing with that. Julian Wilson is still adapting to this position, and he's looked good, obviously, so far, but, this game is going to be the biggest test of the year for him by far, and to see just how well he's transitioned. He's going to be in a lot different place than he was 2 years ago. He was playing middle linebacker 2 years ago in Morgantown, which was absolutely as absurd as it sounds, and we saw the results of that. But I think this is a big game for Julian Wilson. It's a big game, especially, though, for whichever corner has to go up against Kevin White.
Well, Jason, you are writing about Julian Wilson, so people can dive into his story a little bit more in Saturday's edition of OU pregame, as well as on newsok.com. And Barry, Jason mentioned Kevin White. He's the biggest threat that West Virginia has going through the air. How much of a concern is he for those DBs when you look at Zach Sanchez has been injured and Julian Wilson still sort of breaking into this position?
Well, he's a concern. He's an excellent player. Alabama had a devil of a time with him, so the Sooners will too. But I actually been very impressed with Sanchez and Wilson. I think they're up to the task. They're not going to shut him down, but I think they'll hold their own with him. I think the linebackers are under the gun a little bit as well because Holgorsen's offense, he spreads you out, brings receivers coming across the middle on the short route. The linebackers are sort of put in no man's land. So when Holgorsen's offense is going the way it seems to be going now, I mean, everybody is a little bit under the gun, even to the point where even the great pass rushers, you go back to the Texas Tech days when Mike Leach's offense was going high, even great pass rushers had trouble getting to the quarterback. Frustration set in. You can't let that happen, even if you don't get your sacks, even if you don't get a lot of pressure on Clint Trickett tomorrow. You've got to keep at it and just hope that over time your defense sort of wears down the West Virginia offense to some degree.
Well, I want to dive a little bit deeper into Dana Holgorsen versus Mike Stoops, but I want to remind people before we do that you can ask questions of our college football coverage team at newsok.com/live. We're monitoring that, and if you have a question for Barry, Jason, or Kyle, get on newsok.com/live. Give us your question, and we'll try to get to some of those as we go along here with the Football Friday Hangout. Barry, let's follow up on that theme. That's something actually you're writing about for Saturday's OU pregame. Mike Stoops versus Dana Holgorsen. It's been sort of a weird chess match between these two. That high-scoring game 2 years ago, then a very low-scoring game last year in Norman, 16-7 that OU won. Is this the rubber match in this matchup between this offensive-minded Dana Holgorsen and defensive-minded Mike Stoops?
Well, it's been a fascinating 2 years. You're talking about two of the most highly respected football minds in college football, with Mike Stoops' defense and Dana Holgorsen's offense, and the dichotomy of the two games, the separation of the two games, where one literally maybe the most offensively explosive game that any of us have ever seen in 2012, and then last year nobody could even find the end zone. Dana was telling me the other day, they scored one touchdown on Oklahoma last year, and he said it was just a fluke play, an 80-yard run. By I think it was Dreamer Smith is the guy that produced it. He said, we didn't do anything all day. And it was just a crazy difference from believe this is going to be a game somewhere in the middle. I don't think it's going to be low scoring. I don't think it's going to be high scoring. I think you'll see the Sooners move the ball some, but not anything like with Landry Jones and Kenny Stills and Jalen Saunders and Justin Brown in 2012. But I don't think you're going to see the Sooners get shut completely down the way Trevor Knight did a year ago in only his second start. So I think you'll see something in the middle. If I was guessing, this would be close to a draw in the Mike Stoops Dana Holgorsen wrestling match. I expect the Sooners to win, but just because they've got the better team.
Before we get Kyle back into the conversation here in a minute to talk some OSU, Jason, one more question about that matchup between the two coordinators, and really sort of to expand that to the Sooners more at large. That game 2 years ago was such a big performance by West Virginia. Even though they lose the game, you know that it's hung on with Mike Stoops. But has it hung on with the players? Do you get the sense like that's a motivation, like the players who will be out there playing remember it, are going to be influenced by it at all?
They've said all the right things this week. I think Chuka and Gulaway, I feel like he just wanted to not talk about it. Julian Wilson was kind of the same way. Those are really the only two guys left from that defense anyway. But, I do think that it lingers with those two guys and maybe with other players too. I mean, even the ones who didn't really get to play, the ones that were there, that was embarrassing for them. And I think that this is a chance at some sort of redemption. So, yeah, they're not really going to say that, but there's no way that that's not on their mind in some way.
Yeah. A question from Facebook comes in via the newsok.com/live feed. Jason says that Mike Stoops has a better defense this time. However, it's a road game and West Virginia is capable, but he has OU winning 35-24. I picked OU to win 31-13. Barry, Jason, what did you guys have in terms of winning in this? Jason, what do you have?
Well, I went mathematical. I said 33-28 because that's the dead center middle of the two previous games. Sooners have averaged 33 the last two games. West Virginia's averaged 28. There's no reason to think that was what will occur, but I was just playing around. That's what I came up with. I think it'll be a game where each team scores about 4 touchdowns, a field goal or two to set them over the top.
Jason, what about you?
I picked OU 41-31. I don't think it's going to be nearly as entertaining or fun probably as the last time these two teams met in Morgantown, but I do think it will be a competitive game, but I just think OU's a little bit better.
Our newsok.com/live feed brings us another question, this one from Willie. He says, will the Sooners slow down Clint Trickett? And I think that segues nicely into a question. Let's bring Kyle back in here as well on this one. The debate over quality quarterbacks, OU with Trevor Knight, West Virginia with Clint Trickett, and now OSU with Dax Garman. Let's start with you, Kyle. As we look at those three quarterbacks, who would you say has the best quarterback of the three? Can you make an argument for Dax Garman yet?
You know, that's a good question. I'm not sure you can make that argument for Dax quite yet. When we talk about the ceilings of those two guys, the potential for how good they could be, you know, being that Dax is, you know, is inexperienced and still kind of finding his way, I think you could make an argument that his potential as a passer is as good, if not greater, than Knight or Trickett. But that's hard to say. I don't know. Of those three guys, it's an interesting dynamic because they all have been, you know, they either transferred or they have kind of interesting backstories to where they haven't had, you know, 4 full years to develop. Of those three guys, I'd probably say Knight is the guy you'd want. You know, Clint Trickett has shown that he's got big on and he can do some things, as does Garmin. But I don't know. It's a toss-up, I guess, in my opinion.
Well, Barry, what about your perspective on that? Who do you feel like is the better quarterback on the field Saturday between Sooners and West Virginia?
It's an interesting question. I think Clint Trickett has played more good games, but Trevor Knight's played the better game. I don't know that Clint Trickett's ever played like Trevor Knight played against Alabama, but you know, clearly Trickett sort of got his legs under him down the stretch of last season and became a pretty decent quarterback. You know, Trevor is a guy that still doesn't have that many quality starts under him. I would tend to think, though, that Trevor has the bigger upside. He's you know, still a third-year sophomore. Trickett being the senior. I think you would see. You know, I'd probably go with Trevor Knight. He's got the legs as well in a tight game. He could run his way to victory if necessary. So it's a great question, though, and I mean, I'd be open to debate on it. But the upside, we've seen the upside by Knight, and we know there's still more there. So I'd probably go a little bit with Knight.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to have this debate and bring in Dax Garman into the conversation, because as I think about it, I have to think that Dana Holgorsen would be fairly excited about a guy like Dax Garman potentially being in his offense at West Virginia with that big arm. But Jason, what about from your perspective? Who's the better quarterback on the field Saturday?
Oh, like Barry, I think you can make the case for either one. I'd probably go with Knight. And it's sort of a simple argument, but I think the common opponent of Alabama, what Trevor Knight did to Alabama and what Trickett did against Alabama, they both played well, but Trevor Knight won. So I'd probably go with him. But and like Barry said, I think he's got a bigger upside.
Definitely interesting debate. As we're talking about quarterbacks, let's expand it even a little bit more. Barry wrote earlier this week on his blog that looking at OSU's quarterbacks, he'd give J.W. Walsh an edge in terms of which quarterback at OSU has been more productive. I think some OSU fans maybe disagree with that, but Barry, let's talk about that. Talk about that blog a little bit. Why you go with J.W. Walsh, and how quickly could Dax Garman potentially pass J.W. Walsh in productivity?
Well, I mean, I think what Garmin's going to have to do is do it against a quality team. And, you know, if you just look at the raw numbers, Garmin's productivity this year is a little bit better than J.W. Walsh. But J.W. Walsh played 5 quarters, 4 of them against Florida State. So, you know, Dax Garmin's played against Missouri State and Texas San Antonio. So I want to see what Dax Garman does when he goes against a quality defense, which frankly is not going to happen anytime soon, because Texas Tech is up, and then I think Cowboys have Iowa State after that. So, and then Kansas. So we're not going to know a lot about Dax Garman until we get to mid-October. But surely, clearly the early signs are positive. He's got the big arm. He seems to make pretty good decisions. Looks like he can control quarterback. So I think it's very promising. But the idea that Dax Garman is clearly better than J.W. Walsh, I mean, I think that's just not. I don't think you bear that out when you factor in who they played against. If you let J.W. Walsh go the whole game against UTF, we saw what he did against UTF. He had 400-something yards in a game for the ages. So, you know, I want to see Dax Garman against a really quality team.
Yeah, these three guys that we're talking about in Garmin, Trickett, and Knight are probably guys that are going to be in the running, possibly an outside chance to be first team all conference, although I think Bryce Petty, as long as he stays healthy, he's probably the front runner in that. So these are three guys that, sort of second team all conference honors at quarterback are probably what they're sort of fighting for. But Kyle, let's talk a little bit about this lacking defense that Garmin's going to face these next couple weeks. That game against Texas Tech, a 6:30 start next Thursday night. That's that ESPN special. It'll be in the slot that K-State and Auburn filled last night. But Texas Tech will be coming to Stillwater with a new defensive coordinator, because out of the blue on Thursday, Texas Tech announces that it has parted ways with its defensive coordinator. Some news that maybe he showed up under the influence of something, sort of some ongoing drama at Tech. But Tech did give up 438 yards rushing to Arkansas and some schemes that to me didn't look all that difficult. A lot of run up the middle that went for big yardages. What does all of this mean for Oklahoma State in this game against Tech on Thursday, Kyle?
It's a good question. It's definitely never a good sign when you lose a defensive coordinator right before the start of conference play, and I think everyone saw that news come out. And before we learned that maybe, like you had said, that it had something to do with him being under the influence of some kind of substance, that it was maybe an effect of that Arkansas game. 'Cause you're right, it was ugly. And I think a lot of that has to do with just how Arkansas plays. I mean, with Brett Bielema, that they like to ground and pound. They got some big offensive linemen in Arkansas. So it will be interesting to see how that matchup works for OSU, though, because the offensive line is definitely not a strength for the Cowboys right now, with three first-time starters on the right side of that line. And even against UTSA, they tried to do the ground and pound up the middle with not a whole lot of success. But I think part of that was Gundy kind of holding back on the playbook and waiting to use some of his more explosive or dynamic plays until we get into conference play. So I would expect we'll see a heavy dose of the run game with all three of OSU's running backs. I expect them to get a little more creative with the play calling regarding Tyreek Hill's use. We really haven't seen much flash out of him since that Florida State game as far as how OSU's utilized him. So it's going to be interesting. The guy who's taken his place, Mike Smith, is a 2004 Tech graduate, so another really young coach on that Tech staff. I mean, just a couple seasons ago, he was an intern with the Jets. So I don't know how that factors in, but but he's familiar with the team. He was kind of the co-defensive coordinator and linebackers coach before this all went down. So that transition will be interesting, and if anything, maybe this is something for the Tech players to rally around. They already got blown out the game before. Now they got a new coordinator. I mean, talk about having some motivation for coming out with a strong performance. But then again, OSU has the weapons on offense, I think, to do some damage, whether that's on the ground or through the air. But like I said, it'll be interesting to see just how successful this OSU run game can be, considering what we saw last week in that Arkansas game.
Yeah, even though I was watching OSU struggle to run up the middle against UTSA, I couldn't help but think about Arkansas running wild on Tech and thinking, what if OSU just bounces Tyreek Hill outside once or twice? I can't imagine that his speed won't be obvious against Tech. It's just another interesting chapter in the times of Tech. Barry, we've seen obviously the changeover from Tommy Tuberville to Cliff Kingsbury and all the hype that came with that. 7-0 start a year ago. They come to Norman. Yours truly writes that Tech is overrated. We put the big headline on it, and Tech loses its last 5 games of the year. I'm not saying they lost because of the headline. I think that they were overrated at that point, and we just saw them come back down to earth. But Barry, I have to think this is, I mean, it's strange that Cliff Kingsbury gets the huge raise, and now the struggles we see Tech having. Is Tech going to look back on this and regret that it gave Cliff Kingsbury such a big contract this year?
I didn't have any idea why they did that. They did it 2 days before the season opener, and they go out and beat Central Arkansas 42-35 with a late rally. So I don't know what's going on. Kirby Holcutt's the AD down there. Kirby's a sharp guy. We know Kirby. So I don't know what's going on there. I know this: the fan base loves Cliff Kingsbury. He's the quarterback hero. He's a good guy. He wants to be at Tech. All those things. But the truth of the matter is, he's unproven as a coach. He had coached literally 5 years on any level before becoming head coach at Texas Tech, and that's just the inexperience I think is showing in the program. It's showing in the way he's dealt with players in terms of losing 2 quality quarterbacks to transfer. I know it's tough to keep guys, but there seems to be some internal situations there. Now the staff upheaval, the bad defense. It's not a good landscape right now at Tech.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether they can sort of retain some of the momentum that they had early last year. It seems to have died off pretty good. But obviously they're coming to OSU. OSU went out there last year, gave them a pretty good beatdown, a game that a lot of us felt like would be close, and instead OSU just dominated from start to finish. Kyle, I'm not asking for a prediction right now, but what do you foresee next Thursday night? How do you see that game between these two teams that really want to get up and down the field shaking out?
I think this is a game that OSU should win handily. We're talking about a real young team here in the Cowboys, and they've impressed over these first 3 games, especially in the Florida State game. And it almost seemed like this team played its best against Florida State. And I could be wrong, but when you look at the competition they played and the energy and the fire that defense played with Agba, getting those couple sacks and keeping Jameis Winston on the run, it seems like another game where these young guys aren't going to lack any motivation. It's Thursday night. It's all eyes on Stillwater. So I think if the young guys can stay mostly error-free and Dax Garman continue to play as well as he has so far, there's no reason that OSU shouldn't win this game handily, just based on what we've seen from Tech, getting barely winning those 2 early games and then getting blown out against Arkansas.
Well, let's pivot back to the game of the weekend with OSU off for the last couple minutes of the Football Friday Hangout. Bring back in Jason Kersey, and a question from the newsok.com/live page, Jason. A question that asks, where do you think Oklahoma is most vulnerable to the passing attack? Jason, where's the biggest spot of vulnerability out there?
Well, I would probably have to say in the safety position, not so much Quentin Hayes, he's been pretty good, but Ahmad Thomas is his first year starting. He got beat deep once against Tennessee. I think he's sort of adjusting to this role. He's a good player, and I think there's no reason to believe he won't eventually be a really good player, but right now I think he's the biggest liability in the OU secondary for sure.
Jason, this game, of the games that the Sooners have before Halloween, is this the toughest game on their schedule? They go to TCU in coming weeks, and then then the Texas game, and then K-State at home. But could this potentially be their toughest game of that stretch?
Sure, it definitely could be. I think it's either this or the Kansas State game. I don't see Texas as a real threat, although at this time last year they'd gotten blown out by BYU, and I thought the same thing, and then we saw what happened. I think TCU is a good team, but I don't think that they're much of a threat either. I think it's either tomorrow's game in Morgantown or the home game against Kansas State, because we saw 2 years ago that Kansas State has no problem coming in to Norman and winning. What
about that, Barry? How does this game at West Virginia stack up against these upcoming games for the Sooners?
Well, I think it's interesting. They got the game at Fort Worth. I don't think is going to be easy, for a different reason. When TCU's not a big scoring team, but they play good, solid defense. So I think Sooners are going to be tested twice here before going to Dallas, once offensively, once defensively, and I think that'll be good preparation. Not for Texas necessarily, for crying out loud. That's a train wreck right now. And only way they lose that is if they go down there with a terrible game plan, which they did last year. But I think comparing this West Virginia and TCU, these 2 games, is fascinating because they each test one side of the Oklahoma team, and I really think that's going to be beneficial as the Sooners hit the home stretch here in October.
Okay, lastly, before we let you guys go, Reflections on games at West Virginia. Obviously, this is still new territory for us in the Big 12, but Barry, Jason, you've seen games there. Kyle, you have not yet, so I'm going to ask you what you're looking forward to most. But Barry, let's start with you. What aspect of tomorrow's game are you most looking forward to that really has nothing to do with football?
Oh, I think the crowd's going to be unbelievable. You know, West Virginia probably has a bigger percentage of its state population games than any. It's a state of 1.8 million people. Most of them are West Virginia fans, and they have 60,000 fans on Saturday at the ball games. Now, you know, Alabama, Auburn, Oklahoma, Tennessee, everybody has much bigger crowds, but they're also in much bigger states. So I think it's going to be a juiced up place, especially a Saturday night. Sooners would have been in good shape to get an 11 a.m. kick tomorrow. Instead, they got the Saturday night special. You know, West Virginia sells the beer at stadiums. It can get fairly hostile, so I'm anxious to see how the Sooners handle that.
Jason, Barry being very PC, saying it can be very hostile. What are you looking forward to tomorrow night?
I mean, I'd be lying if I said, you know, I wasn't intrigued by the idea of a couch burning.
You know what, guys, I'm told that that's now a state law against couch burning. You burn a couch, it's a felony.
Wow.
Nobody ever breaks state laws. I think state laws get broken all the time, and I'll bet that one will if they win tomorrow. But you know, 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to meet the mayor of Morgantown, and he walked me and Eric Bailey from the Tulsa World around the tailgating, and it was a blast. I mean, those people were a lot of fun, and so I'm kind of looking forward to maybe walking through there again. That mayor was defeated in his re-election bid. So I don't know if he'll be there tomorrow. I was thinking about giving him a call, though, and seeing if he wouldn't mind walking me around again. He
clearly didn't have you as part of his re-election campaign, Jason. You could have given him all sorts of positive pub.
I would have given him my full endorsement.
Okay, Kyle, you haven't been to Morgantown yet for a game. Cowboys don't go there this season. That'll be next year. But what are you looking forward to?
Well, I think the same as these guys. You know, like Jason said, you drive in and it says "Welcome to Big 12 country." Well, I'm sorry, that's not Big 12 country. So just being able to see that landscape and like Barry had said, seeing the passion of a different fan base. You know, because I've covered games at Kansas State, heck, and been around the Big 12 already and seen those environments. So to kind of see how that differs and how those fans come out. Is something I'll look forward to. You know, maybe the long travel, not so much, as I'm sure Barry and Jason can attest to. It's probably not their favorite part of going out there. But other than that, yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it next season.
No team wants this to happen at the end of a game at West Virginia. I know I'm not wishing this on the Sooners, but last year the Cowboys lost, and I got to hear the West Virginia fan base sing Country Road, Take Me Home, all in unison at the end of the game. It stopped me in my tracks. It was unbelievable. Again, no team wants that because it means West Virginia has won, but unbelievable to hear that, to be standing on the field for that. We'll let you know if that happens, obviously. You guys would, if you hear it, it'd be a huge upset tomorrow night in Morgantown. All right, folks, that's it for the Football Friday Hangout. Thanks for joining us at newsok.com/live. And here on the Hangout, be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman. Thanks.